Alright, I am back with another video, and yes, today we are continuing my Expedition 33 kind of mini-series. I just have some good ideas for builds that I want to try out, and so I wanted to make this video. Today, however, we will get back to our regularly scheduled programming soon enough, but today we are building the second of the Expeditioner team, the second character you meet in the game, Maelle. Now, Maelle is an interesting character to try and build, and I will say, actually, before we get into this, there are going to be mild story spoilers for this game. I'm not going to be going into specific plot points, but I might make a joke here or there that will allude to things that happened in the game, as well as some talk about game mechanics that may bring up some questions if maybe you're early on in the game. So I would ask that if you have any intention of playing Expedition 33 at all, please stop watching this video right now and go into it as blind as possible like I did. I had no idea what I was playing when I first got into it, and then by the time I was finished, I was ugly crying. So make sure that if you can have any interest in playing this game, stop watching this video now and go play it. Just go play it. Just go and play it and come back to this video after, and maybe you'll understand a bit more the choices that I have made. So, with that, let's get back to it. I want to make Maelle the way that she is kind of built in the game, because you see, unlike my Gustav build from the other week, where he had a lot less skills to work with, for reasons I didn't get into in that video, but I'm sure most people who've played the game can figure that out. Basically, I had a little bit less to work with, which made him easier to build, whereas Maelle has a lot going on. She has so many different skills and abilities and playstyles, but it was hard to kind of quantify a single build that covered as many bases as possible. So I tried to focus on the most important things that make her unique compared to the rest of the cast. First off, she wields a rapier. That's pretty easy to work with. Second off, she has 3 stances. Or, well, technically 4, but there's 3 that actually do stuff. The first stance that technically isn't a stance is stanceless, meaning that there's no change in her playstyle, but then by using certain skills, you can swap your stance. The first stance is defensive stance, meaning that you take less damage and also regain some of your resources by dodging. So I know I want the ability to basically turn on a more defensive mode for the build. Perfect. The second is, funnily enough, offensive stance, where you deal about 50% more damage, but in turn, enemies deal 50% more damage to you. Okay, so I need a way of entering a stance that deals more damage, but comes with a risk. I can think of a pretty easy way to do that, so that's stance number 2. The third stance is the most tricky though, virtuoso. And this is where Maelle's nuclear playstyle comes into play. Most people will build Maelle towards the endgame as a nuke, someone who is able to stack up massive amounts of buffs and then hit for a massive amount of damage, usually one-shotting most things in the game, even some of the trickier endgame optional bosses. As such, Virtuoso Stance gives you a 200% damage buff, which means we need some way to deal double damage with a single attack. Believe it or not, I figured it out. Don't get me wrong, in a similar way to the Gustav build, this is going to be pretty damn gimmicky, and I'll explain more as we go throughout the build and I show you the choices that I made for the leveling and the spells taken, etc., and the abilities taken, to show how we're getting all of these things, and I'll kind of explain how the Maelle playstyle evolves throughout the game of Expedition 33 and how we replicate that here. So again, please, last chance, step off this video if you haven't played yet, because, I mean, hell, there was a title I wanted to give this video that would have been considered a spoiler, and I didn't. I still don't know what I came up with, but I'm not using the title that I wanted to, which would have been, again, 3, 2, 1, avoid the spoiler now, The Paintress. So, let's go for something else, shall we? But again, I'll explain it as we go. Let's get into the build. First up, Maelle is in fact a human, but again, same as the Gustav build, you can play any race in the game. It really doesn't matter. You're not getting anything from human that we particularly need. The extra skill proficiency is nice, but really we don't need it. So feel free to play elf or like whatever you think would work here. Again, in a similar vein to Gustav, if you played a high elf or a high half elf, you are going to be coming out of that with booming blade, which obviously is just a huge power increase. So feel free to play that. If you want a slightly less accurate character but a more powerful one, go for elf, but I'm going for accuracy as much as I can, so we're playing as good old human Maelle here. And I will say, for what I had to work with, I think I did a pretty good job on the looks. Moving on, our starting class, which is probably going to surprise a lot of people, is Paladin. Paladin is going to give us access to all forms of armor and weapons, which I do want for this build, as heavy armor is going to be kind of important, but you could skirt away with medium armor, or no armor proficiency at all, depending on your choices. More on that later. But Paladin is going to be kind of the safest option for, I think, this build overall. Again, just having those weapon and armor proficiencies is really nice, especially since I have gone with heavy armor here, as well as we are going to need something from Paladin. I mean, you guys probably heard nuking build and thought, well, I know where this is going, but it might not be going the way that you think. Again, stick around. As for your Paladin Oath, your subclass, it really doesn't matter what you pick. You can choose any of these. I went with Oath of Vengeance just because it has the most broad use cases, even if its ability is still a bit niche. But basically just having the ability to spend a bonus action in a Channel Oath charge to just give yourself more radiant damage on an attack. I mean, that kind of adds to the nuke playstyle, but it's not really going to fit into our nuclear rotation when we get into the kind of endgame strats for this. So really, you can use anything you like. I just think Inquisitor's Might is probably got the best overall use case. You can go for Oath of the Ancients, Devotion, or Crown, but I think Vengeance makes the most sense, especially in the context of Maelle's story. Again, if you've played the game, you know what I'm talking about. The background is Urchin. Now, you can choose either Urchin or Guild Artisan, depending on, let's just say, what part of Maelle's story you're on. But let's just say Urchin makes the most sense for the start of game Maelle, so that's what I'm going to choose here, because Maelle was an orphan, getting passed around from foster family to foster family, so I felt like Urchin kind of made sense, so especially with the description there, so it's entirely up to you if you want to go with something else. I would think it would definitely be either this or Guild Artisan, but it's up to you. Now, ability scores. We're playing a Dexedin here. Pretty standard spread for that type of build. Dexterity is at 16 as it is going to be our main attacking modifier. Constitution is at 14. Would have liked this a little bit higher if possible, but 14 is going to be a fine number. We're still going to finish off this build with around 90 HP. And again, if you play this build right, you shouldn't really be getting hit anyway, especially if you play well with your teammates, because you'll be able to dodge pretty pretty consistently well. I don't know why I said that. Brain. Strength and intelligence are both at 8 because we don't need them. Wisdom is at 12 just for those nasty saving throws, but feel free to put those points into something else if you desire. Any of the dump stats will work. And charisma is at 16. This will allow us to be a pretty decent party face, actually, by having our charisma at 16, and it's going to be important for our spells that we'll be casting later. Moving on to our skill proficiencies, we do have sleight of hand and stealth from our background, as well as deception that I chose from our human side, and intimidation and persuasion from our paladin choices, giving us the full bevy of kind of dexterity and charisma based skills, meaning that we're going to be a pretty effective rogue, I guess? We have sleight of hand and stealth, both having a +5 bonus, as well as having a +5 bonus on our charisma skills. So yeah, we're kind of doing rogue things right off the bat, which is kind of fun, which will also make sense when we get into some multiclassing shenanigans. You guys probably already know what's coming. Right, moving on to Paladin level 2. This is going to give us access to a fighting style. Now, the fighting style is kind of important, but obviously you think, well, we're using a rapier, we're going to want to choose dueling. Well, no, we're actually going to get access to dueling later. Feel free to take it now if you would like, but you are going to be respecking it out by the time the build is done with withers. So for now, I would suggest maybe skipping it if you're looking at the final version of the build, in which case I'm just going to recommend you grab Defense for an extra 1 AC. This is going to give you a 19 at base with our armor and before any of our skills that we're going to be using, which is pretty nice. Obviously, we do also need to talk about Divine Smite being a thing, but I'll be honest, I don't really use it in this build, or at least I don't actively use it. While Maelle does have access to a unique damage type called Void Damage, which I guess we could kind of flavor as Radiant in this build, it's not something I actually want to go out of my way to use. So the only time you're going to really be using Divine Smite on this build, if you're trying to stay accurate, is if you get it on a critical hit, in which it's going to be added to whatever damage we're already doing, which again kind of plays into the nuke playstyle. We're not necessarily crit fishing on this one, maybe as much as we could be, so again, you can play around with your equipment choices on that if you want to go for a crit fishing build, but again, I'm trying to be as accurate as possible, so I'm not going for Divine Smite here. However, that doesn't mean we're not going for a smite at all. We're actually going to be using Searing Smite. Now, the thing is with Maelle is all of her nuclear strategies involve burn damage in some way. In Expedition 33, you can basically apply stacks of the burn condition to enemies, and as far as I understand, there's no upper limit, and as such, the more burn stacks an enemy has, the more damage they take. But that's actually not the nuking strategy. The nuking strategy comes from when you use a move called Burning Canvas, which consumes all of the burning stacks an enemy has to multiply the damage that the skill does. I've personally used this strategy to beat a certain endgame super boss that was added in an update, and it worked pretty damn well. I believe I did over 200 million damage. And I will remind people who maybe have played this game, remember, you start doing like 10 to 15 damage with attacks, so the game scales up pretty fast. But anyways, Searing Smite is going to be our version of Burning Canvas, and all of her burn skills rolled into one. It's a big smite attack, dealing an additional 1d6 fire damage, which scales up with the spell slots you are using. So if you use a level 6 spell slot, I believe you're doing 5d6 fire damage? It's 4 or 5. I apologize if I get that wrong, you will have seen it in the combat footage. And basically, this also kind of burns the target, causing them to take an extra d6 of fire damage every subsequent turn. So this is one way we're not only going to be able to do massive amounts of fire damage, we're also going to be able to burn our opponents. So Searing Smite is basically our go-to kind of attack in this build. You're going to be using a lot of spell slots, which means we're going to need a lot of spell slots, which I'll talk about in a little bit. However, for the rest of your spells, we can get an earlier version of our defensive stance by grabbing Shield of Faith to give us a +2 bonus to our armor class. We're not going to be able to use this at the same time we're using Searing Smite, but if you're not going for the nuke and you just want to play it safe for a while, then Shield of Faith with our armor and our defense is going to give you 21 AC total, which is pretty good. As for the rest of what you can pick, there's not really too much I would say here. Maelle doesn't have any direct healing skills, but she does have a revival skill, so Cure Wounds could be used for that. And also things like Compelled Duel, she does have a skill where she takes damage for her allies instead, so you could say that Compelled Duel is this game's version of that. And you can also bring the other smites as well. I might go for Thunderous, just to give us a different element to use. Now, we're not going to be going for Paladin level 3 in this build. Instead, we are immediately going to be multiclassing, and you guys aren't allowed to be mad at me about this one. I've been good. I've stayed away for a long time. My therapist is very proud of me. But we're building a bard today. I'm sorry, okay? Let me explain. Everybody knows this, and I've seen people comment on my videos. When you need a character to do a lot of different things at the same time, bard is usually the best choice. Dante was a bard. Hell, my Virgil build was a bard. Like, so many builds of mine where you just have to do a lot of different things are bards, and Maelle is one of those cases. And people are going to say, well, she doesn't play an instrument. No, her brother did. Her party members do. And you don't necessarily have to play an instrument to be a bard. It's an expression of an art form. Wizards of the Coast, the creators of Dungeons & Dragons, even stated this themselves and included the College of Dance Bard subclass, which doesn't even use an instrument. It dances to use its bardic abilities. So who's to say we can't use our bardic abilities through painting? Yeah, again, I really hope you didn't stick around if you haven't played the game, because, yeah, that's a kind of a big spoiler I just dropped. Yeah, so Maelle is what is considered a paintress. Basically, she's able to use artistic skills to basically create things, like magic. Literal painting magic. That's a bard. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to live with this one. Anyways, moving on. We get to choose a couple of cantrips here. Now, there's a couple of options here that you could go for. Obviously, we could grab friends here to, gain advantage on charisma checks, be a very effective party face. Entirely up to you if you want to take that. I probably will. You could grab another version of our defensive stance here by picking up Blade Reward to basically push a button and gain resistance to physical damage types, which could be really good in a pinch and definitely fits the build, so I might pick that up here. We also have access to level 4 level 1 spells at this point. And really, I'll be real with you, there's not much to pick from here that actually fits the build, so I'm just going to grab a few generically useful things. First up, speak with animals. We do kind of talk to non-humanoid creatures throughout Expedition 33, but I feel like speak with animals can kind of make sense here, especially if you're talking to Monoko. We also have access to Longstrider and Featherfall for being able to get around the battlefield a bit quicker with Longstrider, which makes sense, Maelle is very fast, and Featherfall, again, does also make sense for her. There's no full damage in Expedition 33, so we can actually make this pretty... It makes sense, it just makes sense to have, because again, we can just stop full damage. For your last skill, it's entirely up to you, really doesn't matter. We kind of have everything that we want already, I'm not gonna lie. So pick whatever works best for you. I'm sure somebody in the comments will bring up a skill that she has that I forgot. That could make this work. Heroism might be a fun spell to have if you're not taking it from the Paladin list, because it'll allow you to become immune to frighten and gain temporary hit points each turn. Maybe we could say this is kind of like the shield mechanic from the game, but otherwise, we don't really need it. Your starting instrument can be whatever you like, it doesn't really matter. Again, Maelle doesn't really play an instrument, that's more her brother's deal, and we don't have an option for a piano. So really, the closest, we can just kind of pick whatever you like. I like the violin, I just think it sounds nice. And finally, we get to choose another skill proficiency. Entirely up to you what you want to take here. Again, we're going to get a lot of skill proficiencies by the time this build is done. Really up to you, like I said. I mean, Maelle was an expeditioner, although she was a rather young and inexperienced one, but I could see things like survival and perception all being used here, basically any of the wisdom skills. Obviously, performance would be nice as a bard. Acrobatics would also make sense, but again, how often do you get shoved in this game? He says, remembering that he got shoved into combat footage. And it actually kind of messed up my strategy. So you know what, let's take acrobatics. I think that'll be a good shot. At Bard level 2, we're going to get a couple of things, namely Jack of all trades, making all of our skill checks a bit better, as well as Song of Rest, giving us a third short rest, which will be nice for recovering some resources. You also gain access to another spell at this point. Again, really up to you what you want to take here. We kind of do have everything. Fairy Fire could be nice if you want to give your attack rolls advantage. Distant Whispers could be good as another damaging option, same as Thunder Wave. Really, it is entirely up to you what you want to go with. Pick your favourite. I'm just going to grab Healing Word for a quick bonus action heal. We could say we're using a Healing Tint. At Bard level 3, we get to choose another spell, this time up to level 2, and of course I'm going to be grabbing Heat Metal here. It's another fire damage attack that allows us to deal fire damage over time. It's another form of burning. It can also force enemies to drop their weapons if you want, or you can heat up their armor, making them take that damage and receive disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. Honestly, it's a pretty nice debuffing burning skill that feels pretty good in this build. Now, for our subclass, again, I promise I've been good, but we have to do it this time. It's swords. I mean, come on, when I talked about stance switching, you all knew this was coming. First up, we have Slashing Flourish. Maelle has multiple attacks that allow her to hit all enemies in front of her at once. This is basically going to be as close to that as we're going to get on this build, similar to how in the Gustav build we use Sweeping Attack. Here we're going to be using Slashing Flourish, allowing us to attack up to 2 enemies at one in front of us and deal an additional bit of damage equal to our Bardic Inspiration, which at this point is a d6, but by the end of this build will be a d10, so it's pretty potent. We're also going to get our true defensive stance, Defensive Flourish, where we click a button, do an attack, and it swaps us to defensive mode, giving us a +4 to our armor class. This plus Shield of Faith is going to give us a total of 25 AC, which is pretty damn good. And we're also going to gain access to Mobile Flourish, allowing us to knock an enemy back and then teleport towards them. This one we're not really going to be using too much, as we're mainly going to be focusing on melee attacks, so we don't really need to use this. We're mainly going to be here for defensive and slashing flourish, but you never know when Mobile Flourish may come up. We also do get to choose another fighting style, and this is where you're going to take dueling. So now we have defense and dueling, which is a pretty good combo. We also gain 2 expertise here for our skill proficiencies, and really it's up to you what you want to take here. Anything will kind of work, but I think if you want to be a party face, Deception and Persuasion are going to be pretty good. Maelle, let's just say, is pretty damn good at persuading. Deception, actually, yeah, considering the end. So, we'll just go with that. At Bard level 4, we're going to gain access to another cantrip of our choice. We can grab Vicious Mockery here, because Maelle is known to have a little bit of a mouth on her, but nothing quite in the sense of maybe a bardic damaging sense. However, you can actually fit the, the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel into this build pretty well, to just give yourself a little bit of extra psychic damage each turn as a bonus action. So really, it's kind of up to you. But really, it's up to you. You can pick whatever you like here. None of the other cantrips really do anything for us. Moving on, we get to choose another level 2 spell here. And again, it's kind of up to you what you want to pick. We've basically got everything that I would have liked to have grabbed from this level. Although I do like for the potential nuclear option, if you want to guarantee a critical hit, Hold Person is pretty damn nice. Obviously, you won't be able to use this and Searing Smite, but if you do this maybe with a Divine Smite, that's another way to nuke, obviously, or you could do it with some of our other skills. So really, if we're just going for a do as much damage in a turn strategy, then Hold Person's going to work pretty well in the situations where something like Searing Smite wouldn't. Moving on though, we do get to choose our first ability score improvement or feat of the build, and unfortunately we are just going to be taking an ability score improvement here. I think a lot of people would argue that Defensive Duelist would be a must-have for this build, considering how it works and it can be another way to enter a defensive stance, but between the fact that we already have Defensive Flourish and the fact that I think Defensive Duelist just doesn't really work, I've very rarely ever seen this actually go off outside of builds where I deliberately spec into it. I don't know, I just don't think it works very well. I mean, you have a lot of options here that could potentially work for you, so really just kind of pick and choose. Savage Attacker could be nice if you want to get even more damage, but I do think we kind of need these ability score improvements if we don't want to have to rely on things like for Gloves of Dexterity, which for this build I really don't. So we're going to bump up our Dexterity here, as we're still mostly weapon attack focused. At Bard level 5, we're going to get the ability to get our Bardic Inspiration back on a short rest, as well as Bardic Inspiration being increased to a D8. We also gain access to our first level 3 spell at this point. But again, honestly, we kind of already have everything that I would want. But there is another fire damage attack we can grab here, that being Glyph of Warding. We can paint, a glyph on the ground of an element of our choosing, ranging from deadly fire attacks in an explosion, which is probably what we're going to use most of, or even things like detonating a concussive force to push people away, or even set them to sleep. So Glyph of Warding is just a fun little spell for us. At Bard level 6, we're going to get Counter Charm. Sure. We're also going to gain access to extra attack, which means now, at total level 8, we can finally attack twice in a turn. I know, it's a little bit late to the party, but up till now our strategy has just been to do as much damage as we can in a single hit, which will still be working. This build actually scales pretty well throughout the game. Otherwise, the extra attack that you're going to get here is just going to give you more damage in a turn. Why not, right? We're also going to get another spell here, but again, not really sure what to pick. There's not really too much here that I would say fits the build all too well. However, if you really want to lean into the party face angle, you could pick up Speak with Dead, but really there's a necklace for that, so I don't think it's worth a spell slot on this build. I don't know, we kind of just have everything already, so I would say it is a pick your favorite situation. In my testing, I did take Cloud of Daggers, because I kind of like the idea of having a damage over time sword attack, as it were. Doesn't really fit the build, but could be nice, but we do have a lot of concentration options. I don't know, Enhance Ability is also a really good option for outside of combat, so maybe if you just want to be a bit of a skill monkey with this build, you can go for that. At Bard level 7, we're going to gain access to a level 4 spell, and at this point you're going to take Freedom of Movement. This is just a nice cast it and forget it spell that lasts your whole long rest. It's going to make you immune to stun, make it so difficult terrain won't slow you down, and you cannot be magically paralyzed or restrained. And if it is restrained by non-magical means, you can spend a little bit of movement just to get yourself out of it. Honestly, Freedom of Movement is just a really good thing to cast and forget. It's going to protect you from things like Ensnaring Strike, or just anything that's going to hold you down, and you'd be surprised how much that comes up without you even realizing it. So Freedom of Movement is going to be my pick here for level 4, but again, you have other options available to you. At Bard level 8, we do get to choose another spell from up to level 4, and really at this point, again, you're kind of just going to be picking whatever you like here. It's just up to your personal preference, so grab whatever works for you. I honestly don't even know what I would go for. Greater Invisibility would fit really well into our stealth score that we have, so we can pick that up. We also have access to another ability score improvement or feat, but I really do think at this point we're going to be needing a bump to that charisma, so that's what we're going for. Now, you may think having an 18 charisma only by level 10 is a bit of a problem, but we actually do use an item that we obtain kind of around the point where we bump up our dexterity that allows us to gain arcane acuity, so really having this getting this bump to charisma now is not as harmful as it seems. At Bard level 9, we're going to gain access to level 5 spells, and there's some choices to be made here, I will say. Mass Cure Wounds, Hold Monster, and Dominate Person are all things that I think can work pretty damn well for this build, and I think we're going to be taking all of them. Let's start with Hold Monster. As an upgrade to our Hold Person, we're now going to be able to paralyze pretty much anything we come across except for a very few use cases, and as such as well, that can play into our nuclear playstyle if we need to. We're also going to be swapping out an earlier spell that I really don't think we need or doesn't quite fit the build. To be honest, I'm probably going to take out greater invisibility, because I'll be honest, it's not an ability Maelle has, so I'll take that out now. And we're going to grab Mass Cure Wounds to activate our Phoenix Flame. Again, a special ability where Maelle can raise all of her allies with 50% of their HP while adding burn stacks. Obviously, we're not going to be doing burning at the same time we're doing this, but this can be like a everyone's down, you're the last one standing, you bring them all back up with a decent chunk of HP move. I think it's pretty good to have, so we're going to grab that here. And finally, at Bard level 10, we're going to get some pretty damn awesome stuff to cap off the build. Our Bardic Inspiration now increases to a D10, the highest possible damage, meaning that all of our Bardic Flourishes will be doing an extra D10 of damage, which is very, very nice for us. We do get another cantrip at this level, which we really don't need, so True Strike, because funny. We're also going to gain access to another level 5 spell of our choosing, and again, now this is going to be getting into heavy, heavy spoiler territory, so please, this is your absolute last chance. Dominate Person. My man Verso got done real dirty in that ending. We're also going to gain access to magical secret. Okay, I will just say, for those of you who have played the game, I know that's technically not what actually happened. She wasn't literally controlling him, but still, basically she was. Now, for our magical secrets skills. Here we go. This is kind of a fun one. There is an ability in the game, and again, massive spoilers, please, why are you still here? There's an ability in the game that Maelle will get towards the very end called Go Marge. Go Marge is the act of completely deleting someone from existence. And she does it as part of a sword attack. Come on! Banishing Smite allows you to hit someone with a massive amount of force damage, which I will be calling void damage in this instance, which allows you to banish your target from the plane. Like, that's literally the Go Marge attack from the game. How could I not include it in this build? And getting it as the final level in the build just feels so satisfying. So yes, we're taking Banishing Smite here. Fight me. Now, of course, by being at this level, we also gain access to a lot of stuff that would fit the build quite nicely. So let's go over the options that you have. First up, Fire Shield. Burn anybody who gets close, enveloping yourself in fire. No, not in the way that you're used to as Maelle. Oh, oof, that was dark. But yes, you can go for a Fire Shield here if you want to give yourself a bit more counterattack damage. That will play into some of the equipment that we have, but it's honestly not necessary. More Fire is also good, though it might trigger some PTSD. Fireball, obviously, big fuck-off damage fire spell. Could be very nice to have, as well as I think it is probably the most popular option that I would say most people would pick. Haste, we get this another way, but if you want it a bit more consistently, we could grab Haste here. More healing spells like Mass Healing Word, Spirit Guardian, Slow, Misty Step. You've got so many good options. However, this is going to sound strange, but I think the most accurate option, which I didn't actually use in my testing, but I thought about this as I was kind of getting ready to record this video, would actually be Scorching Ray. You see, Scorching Ray can be upcast pretty damn nicely, and this will allow us to get, albeit a bit late into the build, Maelle's multi-shot. In a similar way to Gustav, every character can, from my last build, every character in the game can free aim, basically use their skill AP, so their resource that they use to cast skills, to basically fire off bullets. So you can fire off as many bullets as you have AP. Again, a part of Maelle's nuclear strategy sometimes is to just fire as many of these bullets as possible to stack up burn stacks, because of course there's an ability that lets you stack burn stacks when you shoot things. So Scorching Ray, being able to deal fire damage and basically be a multi-shot that we can upscale to shoot as many rays as we want, is actually pretty nice. So I feel like it actually fits the build quite well, although I did take Fireball in my testing, which, I mean, obviously did the job, come on, but I actually think Scorching Ray is more accurate. Wish we could have got it earlier in the build, but alas. And finally, you're going to get a couple more skill expertise, grab Intimidation, and Stealth. Why not? And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is I mean, come on, it's a Swordsbard Paladin. What aren't you getting out of this? You wanted nuclear damage, you've got it. Searing Smite is going to be able to do a massive amount of damage both in a single attack and over time, thanks to the upcasting up to level 6, because thanks to those 2 levels of Paladin, we still get those level 6 spell slots. We also have Divine Smite, obviously, which, you know, you could just use whenever, but also Banishing Smite. We have a lot of different smites. We have ways to debilitate our opponents while still keeping up those burn stacks with things like Heat Metal. We have ways to enter our various different stances through things like Defensive Flourish. Although you may notice, throughout that entire leveling scheme, I didn't actually mention Offensive Stance or Virtuoso Stance, which I will in a moment. But again, you can debilitate your enemies through things like Hold Monster in Person, you can do healing, you can just do kind of everything. You're a party face, but you're also a powerful fighter. This build's biggest weakness, though, I would say, is the fact that it has a slightly lower constitution for someone who wants to use a lot of concentration spells, and the fact that we didn't get con save proficiency here is a little bit dangerous. But again, our idea is to not get hit in the first place, not to take hits and live them. But again, even so, we still come out of this with a decent 90 HP, so we're not too badly off. But let's get into the equipment, where you'll start to see this build's playstyle really come into play. First off, our weapon of choice is, probably quite expectedly, the Rupturing Blade. Obtained right away in Act 1, it is a fire-attacking rapier, which can use a unique attack called Searing Blood, allowing you to deal extra fire damage, as well as extra piercing damage as well. You take a little bit of slashing damage yourself in the process, and you can only use this once per short rest, but it is a powerful nuclear option if you don't want to set up, or you don't want to use your spell slots. However, because this is an early game weapon, while it is a +1 weapon, so it's decent, I do recommend that to really make this playstyle pop, you buff it with the Drakethroat Glaive to give it an extra 1d4 of fire damage. Unfortunately now, as of the most recent patch, the +1 enchantment you get from Draconic Elemental Weapon and the +1 enchantment that a weapon already has no longer stacks, so we're not making +2 weapons anymore, which is a crying shame, but you're still going to get that extra 1d4 of damage, which we are going to want for this build. Make sure you choose the fire buff, it is important. Now, because this is obtained right away in Act 1, you actually don't need an early game option, so just grab this as soon as you can. Now, moving on, we also have, yes, the Darkfire Shortbow here. I know, I am going straight back into old habits today, but we kinda do need it. While I didn't take haste as part of our magical secrets, if we do want to enter our offensive stance, yes, we are going to need haste. Haste is going to give us a buff to our armor class by 2, as well as giving us an extra action and giving us more movement speed. But of course it comes with the caveat that if we take a hit and we lose our concentration, we become lethargic, which opens us up to a massive amount of damage because we lose a turn effectively. So that's offensive stance. It's haste. I know, not the most creative solution, but haste does so many things that it just makes the most sense. Don't worry, Virtuoso stance is much more creative. You'll see. But yeah, no, so obviously we do want haste. Of course, this is only once per long rest, so you're going to want to use it pretty sparingly, basically just using it for your big encounters, but I do think, again, if you want to grab haste another way, you absolutely can. You can through the magical secrets at the end, but otherwise this will work perfectly well. And some of you may disagree with this, but we actually do need resistance to fire damage on this build to really make it flow properly. People are going to argue that I should have made Maelle vulnerable to fire damage, but in actuality, we're still living in a fantasy world. We're still living in our own delusions in which, you know, we didn't start the fire. It wasn't always burning. But we're going to try and make sure that we don't let it happen again. So yeah, we're going to be resistant to fire damage as well as cold damage, because, you know, that's just a nice extra bonus. Why did they make one shortbow so stacked? God damn. But anyways, moving on from that, we now get to talk about our equipment, and this is where the fun begins. You've got 2 options for your headpiece on this build. The Pyro Quickness Hat, which is what I primarily used in testing, but also the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, which you'll pick up in the earlier game, I should say. Anyway, pretty much right at the start of Act 2, if you know what you're doing. So, first up, the Pyro Quickness Hat. Whenever you deal fire damage with a leveled spell, so for us, that's Searing Smite, you burn yourself. Again, this is getting darker and darker, but it gives you an additional bonus action this round. See, the problem with Searing Smite is, compared to regular Smite, is it costs your bonus action to use. So if we're going to be using Searing Smite consistently, unfortunately that means that we're going to be giving up our bonus action to do other things, which kind of sucks. Except with the Pyro Quickness Hat, you no longer have to worry about that. It does mean you have to use Searing Smite first, which does kind of suck, I'm not going to lie, it does kind of interrupt the flow a little bit, but still having that bonus action is better than not having it. But what about the burn damage that you're going to be taking? Well, this is where I'm going to jump around a little bit, and we need to talk about the adamantine splint armor, which is going to reduce all of our incoming damage by 2. It also gives us kind of another form of defensive stats in which, if an enemy hits us with a melee attack, they receive reeling, which means they get a penalty to their attack rolls, which means their subsequent attacks are unlikely to hit, as well as we cannot have critical hits land against us, which is kind of nice. Unfortunately, we do have disadvantage on stealth checks with this armor, but again, I'll talk about the alternative in just a second. I'm sure some of you are eyeing it over there on the inventory screen right now. But you see, because we have fire resistance from the Darkfire Shortbow, plus the resisted damage from the adamantine splint armor, we cannot take damage from being burned, because burn only deals 1d4 fire damage each turn. Because we cut all fire damage in half thanks to our resistance, the highest amount of damage we can take is 2. And because all damage is resisted by 2, thanks to the adamantine splint armor, you cannot take damage from burning, or our other status condition that I'll get to in a minute, heat. So, there is no downside to using the Pyro Quickness hat on this build. You're basically going to get a free bonus action every turn. It's Thief Rogue with a bit of spice. Literally. However, let's also talk about the Helmet of Arcane Acuity and why it's going to be kind of important to the early to mid game. Because the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, with our leveling scheme, is going to be essential for allowing our spells to go off. Since we took a dexterity bump first, if we use the Helm of Arcane Acuity, it allows us to increase our spell save DC and spell attack rolls by 1 for each remaining turn of the condition, and we gain a stack of the condition every time we deal damage with a weapon attack, meaning that we can attack with something like Searing Smite because it does count as a weapon attack, and basically, or just even our regular weapons or our blade flourishes, and still just gain access to a buffed spell save DC, which can help with our other spells, like Searing Smite itself, or Heat Metal, or other things like that. You can even keep this throughout the whole game if you're finding that extra bonus action to not be too effective. You can just keep this and basically guarantee that your spell saves are going to go off. So otherwise, it's entirely up to you which one you want to pick, but I do think the Pyro Quickness hat fits the flow of the build better. So yeah, that's kind of part of the overall strategy there to kind of help the build flow a bit more smoothly in the endgame. Next up, the Cindermoth Cloak. A creature that damages the wearer within 2 meters receives burning. Yep, that's all that's here for, just another way to spread the burning condition, which causes everyone who has it to take a 1d4 fire damage each turn. So yeah, we're literally getting burn stacks. That was kind of the easiest part of the build to figure out, I'm not gonna lie. So, we already talked about the adamantine splint armor, but now I need to talk about a thematically accurate endgame armor piece that I never ever use in my builds, because normally you have to beat Raphael the super boss to even get it, so by that point, are we even really playing a character build anymore? Because by that point, the game's done. But I have to talk about the Heldusk armor. Base 21 armor class. With our defense and defensive flourish, we're looking at just a lot of defense. That's going to be a total of 26. Damn. So, with that, we need to consider, let's have a look at our armor here. We are considered proficient with this armor while wearing it, so you don't actually need the heavy armor proficiency, so if you want to swap around the leveling scheme of this build to maybe start with Bard for more skill proficiencies and expertise, you could. You also, whenever you succeed a saving throw, the person who falls for saving throw on you gets burned for 3 turns. Again, very thematic to the build. You also have resistance to fire damage, meaning that you technically don't need the Darkfire Shortbow anymore for that. You could give that to someone else if you maybe grabbed haste another way. And you yourself cannot be burned. We're living in a fantasy. Now, I will point out that the trigger for getting the extra bonus action from the Pyro Quickness hat does require you to be burned to get the extra bonus action, so that actually will make the Pyro Quickness hat inert, I think, if I'm getting that correctly. So you will be using the Helmet of Arcane Acuity instead, but that doesn't really matter here. I just have to talk about this armor. You also take 3 less damage from all sources. So yeah, this is a one-stop shop for not needing to take any damage at all from heat or burn, which is pretty damn good. You also gain the ability to fly, which, yeah, Maelle does kind of get towards the end there. Some of her skills just have her straight up flying, which looks cool. But still, you can use it once per long rest as a bonus action, and this version of Fly does not cost you concentration. Now, why am I talking about this? Other than the fact that it is probably the most thematically appropriate armor in the game for her, 100%, you normally can't get it until the endgame, which is why I have the adamantine splint armor here as our main choice. However, according to the wiki, and I've not tested this as of the recent patch, so let me know if this still works or it doesn't, I still recommend you try and get this for the endgame for this build, because again, it is correct. It's just what you should be using. But There is technically an exploit that exists to get this in Act 1. If you know how to do it, feel free to do it, because that means you'll have access to this as early as possible. So, yeah, it's technically possible to get this in Act 1, allegedly, unconfirmed. Source is dude, trust me. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I just wanted to point out that this is technically possible to get in Act 1, maybe, sometimes, I have no fucking clue. Moving on to the gloves, of course we're going for the Thermo Arcanic gloves, are you kidding me? Whenever we deal fire damage, especially the fire damage from our Drake for a Glaive buff, you're going to be able to grab turns of heat. This is how we're going to be building up part of our nuclear strategy. We're not just stacking burn stacks on our enemies, we're going to be stacking them on ourselves, because heat allows you to, whenever we deal fire damage, we're basically going to be able to build up heat charges. We take 1d4 fire damage each turn we have heat, but we obviously don't take that damage, normally, if we have the armor. With this, we also get to use heat convergence once we have enough heat to build up, and for some reason the tooltip isn't working, but I can just explain it to you. Basically, you'll get a little toggle over here on your hotbar, which you can activate, and it will spend all of your heat charges on your next fire attack to deal an extra point of damage for every stack you have, and in my testing, the maximum you can have is 7. So that's plus 7 damage that acts as a damage rider on all fire-based damage that we do in a single attack. Reminder, our weapon attack is going to deal a 1d4 of damage. During Smite, it's going to deal an extra however many d6 you have. So that's plus 7 on those. That's a lot of damage. Obviously, it doesn't work as well on someone who resists fire damage, but it's still a lot of damage, so being able to combine heat and burning and searing smite into one build just feels so powerful, especially when we can completely negate the negative effects of the status condition. We're also going to be combining this with the Cinder Shoes. Whenever we burn an enemy, we also gain 2 turns of heat that can be spent on heat convergence. So yeah, overall, between these two, you're going to be building up burn and heat stacks pretty consistently with all your equipment and your abilities and such like that. So honestly, it's a pretty potent combo. I would say though, maybe the Cinder Shoes are a little bit of overkill. You could probably swap these out for something else, but I do think they synergize nicely with the build. Now, I'm going to talk about the rings first as we go into our accessories, as these are both kind of like chop and change things that you can kind of change around. They're not essential to the build, but I wanted to include them. First up, the Ring of Elemental Infusion. When you deal acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage using a spell or cantrip, that element infuses your weapon. Until the end of your next turn, you deal an additional 1d4 damage of that element on your first successful weapon attack. Of course, this means if we use Searing Smite, our next weapon attack is going to deal an additional 1d4 fire damage. Again, that could potentially work with heat, so even though that 1d4 extra damage doesn't seem like a lot, it's technically 2d4 extra fire damage thanks to our Drake for a Glaive buff, that can be buffed with heat, which is kind of nice. As you can also see here, we're also using the Ring of Self-Immolation. I know, I'm not trying to make that joke. I know, trust me. But basically, you can set yourself on fire to gain 2 turns of heat as a bonus action once per short rest. Just a quick way, if you've got nothing else to do with your bonus action on that turn, just pop this and get a couple of turns of heat. This one I would say is definitely most likely to get swapped out, which you could throw on the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel in the late game instead, to give you the ability to cast illusion or enchantment spells as a bonus action after making a weapon attack. So again, you make a weapon attack, you got that free extra bonus action from the Pyro Quickness hat maybe, and you really don't know what else to do with it, just hit them with a Vicious Mockery. Why not? Tell them to parry it. Tell them to parry your attack, even though you're fighting God. And he hurts a lot with 50,000 attacks in a single turn. You have to parry all of them, somehow. Those post-update games were brutal. Those post-update fights were brutal, man. But anyways, now we need to talk about Virtuoso. The final part of our nuke. Our one-time use big attack that we get once per long rest. I know, this kind of sucks, because normally you can go into Virtuoso stance in Expedition 33 way more consistently. But I feel like we've got so many nuclear options, the Virtuoso stance is just going to be the icing on the cake. So, how are we dealing double damage with our attack? It's the Amulet of Branding. Now, this gives us the ability called Brand the Weak. While yes, we can only use it once per long rest, I'll be honest, you're really only going to want to use this on a big boss anyway, and if you're fighting more than one big boss per long rest, then you're probably playing the game wrong. You're supposed to long rest as much as possible, and even on honor mode, you really still do that anyway, so it's not really a huge deal for the resource limitation. However, what this does is this allows you to make an enemy vulnerable, meaning they'll take twice as much damage from bludgeoning, slashing, or piercing damage. So, With this, we will activate Brand of the Week using our bonus action, because that is what it takes. Then, we can make it so we are gearing, and that will last 3 turns or until the target takes damage. So you cast this first, do some other buffs, maybe activate haste, whatever. Then, once you've got that up on your opponent, you've got enough heat stacks, the maximum amount you can, and the enemy is burning, then you hit them with a Searing Smite, meaning that they're going to take the extra fire damage from heat convergence, as well as take double damage from the weapon attack element of the attack, meaning that Searing Smite is going to deal double physical damage and a +7 on all of its extra fire damage. Yeah, that's our bloody nuke. And it works, baby. It works. You do a big chunk of damage with this. Yes, it's gimmicky. Yes, it's probably not going to work 90% of the time, but when it does, ooh, it does. So yeah, that is the build. I'm pretty proud of it. I think it actually works. I think it's as close to Maelle as we're going to be getting. Did I get all of her skills? No, because that's kind of impossible. And a lot of her skills are just different variation of hit the enemy with your sword a bunch of times. So really, we kind of just got that in the mix anyway. Now, quickly, as always, the fashion. We are using Fear Taylor's Camp Clothing mod and the Faerun Colors mod, as always. Both are available on console, so bloody use them, goddammit. First up, we have the Leather Armour version 2, and the Leather Boots 2, as well as the Leather Gloves, all 3 available from the mod, coloured in the Zariel dye to give us this black and gold look. Wish I could fit some purple in there, and she's gone. Seriously, Maelle? You're gonna set in the wall? Okay, she's just facing a wall now. Sometimes this just happens. This does give us a black and gold look, which obviously the Expeditioners do have. Couldn't really fit the little flecks of purple in there, though, which was a bit disappointing, but I'm sure someone else could do a better job than moi. So yeah, that is it. That is the build, and overall, I'm pretty happy with it. It does what it sets out to do. It's a perfect jack of all trades. It's great if you want to play Maelle as kind of your Tav, your player character. Maybe if you're going to be doing an all Expedition 33 party build, maybe once all my builds are done, Maelle is going to definitely be the one that you want to play as the party face for sure, just because she does it the best. We're sitting in an 18 charisma with expertise in most of our charisma skills, meaning that we're just going to be succeeding pretty much every charisma check in the game. We've got good dexterity-based skills as well. We can be our stealthy rogue with sleight of hand and stealth. We've got access to healing. We've got access to our different stances, and we could just go nuclear with the damage. It's so fun. I absolutely love it. It's kind of funny that the 2 characters I chose to build first kind of have like their nuclear options, Gustav with his overcharge and Maelle with her burning canvas. So yeah, we've kind of gone for 2 big damage dealers, which again is kind of just Expedition 33's endgame. By the end of it, if your characters aren't either nuking or setting up for nuking, you're probably doing something wrong, or you're very good at parrying. Which I admittedly am kind of on the middle tier of skill on. I can do some, but not others. But yeah, overall, pretty happy with this one. Not too much else left to say. There are 3 Expedition 33 characters left to do: Ciel, Lune, and Monoko. Monoko, I mean, I'm probably not going to do a dedicated build on. Oh, actually, there's one more character I forgot to mention, Verso. No, there's technically 4, but I'm going to only do 3 more build videos on them. Because Monoko, unfortunately, isn't really a dedicated build. He's not really possible to recreate in the traditional sense, and to be honest, if you're going to have him in your party, you're kind of just building a moon druid, I'm not gonna lie. But maybe somebody could prove me wrong if they actually got to the end of this video and heard this little tidbit. Maybe someone could tell me, hey, maybe there's a different way you could do it. But for now, I'm not really planning to build Monoko. Ciel is possible. I feel like there's some things I could do with that. Basically stacking up a resource on an enemy that you can use to do more damage against them. That's probably something that's possible. Lune, very easy. Earth magic is the biggest concern there. Not really sure I'm going to do that, but we'll see. And then there's him. Verso. That's going to be hard, but we'll see if I can do it. I might take a little bit of a break from the Expedition 33 build series for a bit to go back to our normal builds for a while, but we'll see. Anyways, that's going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.